often the threats are from the inside, but hackers obviously can be from the outside, as Sanjay just pointed out. Manipulators of data or manipulators of your network can be terrorists, they can be state actors, they can be others. But how can you find out about the hackers before they do damage? That's the subject of our next conversation with Matt Olsen, the Chief Security and Privacy Officer for Uber. He used to run the National Counterterrorism Center. And Sue Gordon, she literally just left government last week. Her most recent position was Principal Deputy Director of National Intelligence. And this, we are happy to say, is her first day not in the government. We're glad to have you here. And to interview these two principals is Suzanne Kelly, the founder and CEO of the Cipher Brief. It's a great resource for exclusive insight on all things national security. The Cipher Brief. Go check it out. Matt, Sue, Suzanne, welcome to the stage. Nice to see you again. How are you? Nice of you to come. Hi, how are you? Good to see you again.
Great to see you.
Hi, how are you? Good to see you.
Wow. I have to say we're so lucky. I mean, I realize it's the last panel of the day, but what an amazing couple of people that we're going to share the stage with and talk about the collective experience between government and the private sector. Let's have a seat and get right to it. Awesome. And congratulations on your first day out.
Yeah, thanks. I chose to be here with you.
That's right.
I would have gone on vacation, maybe. But.
So I want to jump right into it because, you know, the both of you have really unique sets of experience. So you spent the bulk of your career in the intelligence community, a lot of time at the CIA, most recently as a Principal Deputy Director of National Intelligence. The insider threat thing is not new to you. Nope. I would like for both of you, and Matt, you've been at Uber now for just a little over a year. It's your Uberversary, I think you said, right?
Most recently.
Yeah, but they did away with the watches. I'm sorry about that. Let's talk about experience learned. What would you say if you had just a few minutes to capture people's attention on what you've seen when it comes to insider threats and what lessons you've learned?
So I think what I'd share with you is there are some lessons the intelligence community can offer to you. And one is security has been a C-suite concern for our whole existence. And so our leaders have long understood that we have to, because of the special trust the American people put in us, that we have to maintain the integrity of the enterprise, make sure that our products and services are true, and that we can ensure the safety of our people. And the advantage that we derive from it being an enterprise approach is the leaders can set some norms, take some enterprise-wide action, which you will be shocked to know that in this environment, some of the actions that leaders want to take are not popular with all of our workforce. And it is a culture of responsibility. And we're going to come back to this topic, but what I would say is you will never combat insider threat if you don't have an organizational sense of collective responsibility to ensure that you are protecting what you have. And that protection is more than just the narrow thing that your company has. And we'll talk more about some examples of some insiders, but that's just the one thing I leave it. It's a really end-to-end cultural responsibility that is the foundation of protection against insider threat. And even when you do that, it's really, really hard. And we can talk about some of the insider threats that we've suffered.
Nearly impossible. So mitigation and finding the best mitigation strategy. Matt, what have you learned since being in the private sector that is different when it comes to insider threats?
Yeah, well, first of all, I really agree with Sue that this is fundamentally a cultural challenge. And it starts at the top, but it goes up and down any organization. And I think what I've learned, sort of having been on both sides of this now, you know, I spent most of my career in the government, most of it actually in the Department of Justice, which has a different approach from the intelligence community. So, you know, we shouldn't talk about the government as though it's monolithic on this issue. In fact, you know, the Justice Department it tends to be more open, right? More of an organization that tends to be more outward-facing than the intelligence community. But you know, one of my jobs in the intelligence community was as the general counsel of the National Security Agency. You know, very secretive, mission by nature, by definition, secretive, very valuable information, a huge focus on internal security, you know, with some very infamous lapses in that security. But then I went from that job to being here with a San Francisco-based company, Uber. So I've sort of seen it from both sides. There are some significant differences. One of the big differences, of course, is the degree to which the workforce is open to and tolerant of significant monitoring, right? You have in the intelligence community, when you go to work there,
you agree.
You agree. You agree. You go through a security clearance. That I can tell you, and you know better than anyone, is incredibly intrusive. That's not really something that this, any private sector workforce would tolerate, and I think particularly true here. So that's a big difference. But I think the most important point I would make is just one of the commonalities, one of the similarities, is the need to balance the ability to share information. It's an imperative in the intelligence community, sharing information so that you can conduct the operations and conduct the business of the agency. That's true in a company like Uber or any other company. You need to be able to share information while at the same time protecting it. And striking that right balance, whether you're in a government agency or in a company, is a challenge. And I think the way companies think about it, in the government you can really lock down information to a certain degree, and you can apply processes that slow down the sharing. I mean, there's a cost to doing that. I think what I've seen in companies like Uber is a willingness to build technology to anonymize and aggregate data in a way that protects privacy, which is an imperative, while still enabling the sharing of the kind of data that is the driving force of business innovation.
Yeah, so just to add on that, and then
you're
I'll give it
fine.
back to you. This notion that there's a cost to this protection, there's a cost to everything, and we see it across the whole security spectrum. We don't patch our systems even though we know we should. We don't want to limit access to data because we want to do things quickly. We want more permissions, and so there's a cost to it. So one of the things to think about is the risk aspect and how you're going to manage risk. And we can talk more about some of our notable insider threats, but what I will tell you is no matter how hard you try, you're not going to be able to protect everything because you're going to need to do something. And so what I would say to all the people in this audience is understand what's important to you. So when I used to think about security, I wanted to make sure that we didn't lose everything and we didn't lose the one or two things that we couldn't lose. I didn't try and make it so that nothing escaped because that then imposed too great a cost on the business. So you just have to get into this risk management, but it starts with knowing what's important to you. And not only what's important to you, but what would be important to those who would do you harm. And you will know better who would do you harm.
And we talked a little bit, we heard from Sanjay just a moment ago about kind of the disgruntled employee. When you think about building a structure where you're segmenting certain parts of what's valuable, whether you're in government or in the private sector, so that not everyone has access to it, how do you take that one step further then without spying on your employees? Like you said, the government, you sign up for it, right? You have a sense of mission. I think it's very different culturally on one coast and another. You're willing to give up more almost because you feel like you're a part of a mission. I think when it comes to the private sector, it's a little bit different. It's like, wait a minute, I don't want to give up my cell phone. I don't want to be spied on. I don't want to have keystrokes. Like, how do you address that gap? Because now we know that if you take down, a major company, a major American company, you could, in effect, be damaging the overall economy, depending on who gets hacked, which leads to national security issues. So, in short, how do you go about doing that in a way where you're addressing those very legitimate cultural concerns?
Yeah, I think, well, there are legitimate cultural differences. I do think that the tools at your disposal are very similar in the government as they are in the private sector. So you think about, to your point, so you think about understanding what's the most valuable information you have, and you build tools to limit access to that data. You conduct, you use logs, tried and true method. You understand when you record what people are doing, so that if there is a breach, whether it's an insider or an external source, you are in a position to respond to it because you can identify what's happened. For us, I think at Uber, and I think many companies, one of the key points, as I mentioned, is to anonymize the data and aggregate it in a way so that we can derive business value from it without exposing the personal data of our users. And that is really a technology solution. And I think we do some of the same things, and we did some of the same things in the government when I was at NSA and in the intelligence community. I see great innovation occurring at places like Uber around data anonymization that drives the business, so we make that information available to understand trends in the marketplace without exposing the personal information of our users.
Sue, anything to add on that?
No, I think that's a great answer. So I'd say in the last 10 years, there's been a growing trend, and in the last recent years, there have been a lot of unauthorized disclosures from the government side of what had heretofore or what is currently sensitive information. I would say what we have doubled down on are two things. One, protecting our most sensitive information more, and there's a concurrent effort we have going on to make sure that the people that need to use elements of that data have access to the elements of the data, even if they don't get access to the things you most need to protect. So it's kind of a technical solution of locking it down, but you must provide for the information people need. And then it's doubling down on the oath. But I will say it is a hard thing to get people to agree to submit to more investigation. Matt's right, the behavioral heuristics are some pretty good stuff where that can be anonymized. You're just looking to see, do people behave as have historically behaved or as their positions would say, and that seems to be more tolerant.
I'd love to take kind of an informal poll without the cool technology, but just wondering here, by show of hands, how many of you feel like insider threat is a serious issue at the company you work for? So not many. Is that part of by design? I mean, is it better if people aren't thinking about it? Top line.
So one, awesome, because what that means is you already have that culture that says people feel responsible for protecting the integrity of the organization. That's fantastic. One thing I'd say is, from my perspective, looking at adversaries who would do us harm, they may use insiders as access, not just an insider who has malfeasant intent themselves. And so that can be a blind spot.
What do you mean by that? Do you mean?
Yeah, so that most of our penetrations are not technical penetrations of our systems. Right. Our encryptions are good, our systems are good. What happens is that those who want to break into our governmental systems find a way either through spear phishing or recruitment, get somebody to do something many times that they don't recognize is actually penetrating their own system. So I do think you need those things around it to catch those behaviors, and I think you need some educational folks. Let me just say it. Increasingly, the threat surface America are not governmental systems, they're yours. Because you're the strength of what we're doing, and our adversaries have figured out that you're where American strength resides. So it may not have been that you perceived yourself as having something that would be interesting, but you increasingly do. And we're all bound together. So one of our most favorite insider threats was Edward Snowden, right? And he did massive damage to the security of the nation just in terms of what he exposed about information operations on our perspective. But he did more damage to the private sector because one of the things he exposed was a relationship between the government and companies, and our adversaries were able to go and demand more of those companies in order to do business with them. So the last thing I'd leave you is the reason why insider threat is such an important issue is because you have people who know the most and have the best access. And if it's not just your company, there's an ecosystem that we're all a part of. And so protecting that is as much a part of anything else.
Yeah, I really agree. I mean, when I think about how to think about an insider threat program, one of the things I would emphasize is that it's really multidisciplinary. So it's not just a cybersecurity program or a physical security program. It's something that you need to have people who understand what are the risks among our employee base, what are the kinds of things where you might have concerns about particular employees, combined with what access do those individuals have, how do you minimize the amount of data they have, what kind of tools can you build so that if there's a query that accesses X number of pieces of data in return, that creates an alert. There's all kinds of tools, but it's multidisciplinary in that it requires all of these folks from different parts of your company and different backgrounds working together. And I know that's true as well in the intelligence community and the government. It's the same kind of approach. And the last thing I would say on this, just to agree with you, Sue, is one of the great long-term damages that we've seen from insiders that are determined to to bring information out, to disclose information, is the breakdown in trust. I mean, there's the initial cause of damage from the disclosure of the information, but the longer term damage is the distrust that created, partly because of lack of understanding of how the government was working with companies, and now the way it came out, this creates long-term damage to the trusting relationships. And that's going to take, I think that's what's taking so long to rebuild, is that trust.
Let's give you the opportunity to engage a little bit here as well for a few minutes. Does anyone have specific questions? If not, I'm going to talk about the future of work for a moment. We do have a question. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I guess I'll ask a question. And Sue, something you just said about Snowden raised one for me, because as a citizen, I understand that he represented certainly an insider threat. But once I understood the information about how the government was operating, I was concerned. So was the government's stance and policy also a threat? Should it have explained itself differently, not revealing tactics necessarily, so that I as a citizen didn't feel like, oh my goodness, well, I'm glad I know that now.
Yeah, so totally agree. So I'm going to have to separate these two ideas. There was nothing good, in my estimation, about what Edward Snowden decided to do, because unauthorized disclosure of information are universally bad. I think you all would say the same thing too. Given that it happened, we learned, there are two things we learned. Number one is when it first happened, if you recall, the only people were talking about it was everyone but the government. And so that then just bred this whole set of misinformation. The second thing is we realized we hadn't been having the conversation with the American people that we need, right? So we need to protect sources and methods, but we are still affecting the American people's will, and we hold that trust. And so I think if you see post-Snowden a huge move to transparency, it's still not perfect because we try and find that balance. Just one thing, the national intelligence strategy this year was unclassified for the first time ever, the whole strategy. So I traced that to Snowden, where we realized we really hadn't had exactly what you said, Juan, that conversation with the American people, because it's your trust that we have to maintain, even when we have to do some things in a secret manner. So, but I just hate conflating those two because it makes it seem like I think what he did was right, but I think we derive benefit from.
Great.
Matt, largely agree. Anything different?
Yeah, I agree. I think, coming back full circle to our initial points on culture, I think whether it's the culture of government around transparency or the culture of companies, and rules that allow for there to be pressure valves to be released, transparency, openness within a company, opportunities to bring forward concerns, whether they're through integrity hotlines, in the government, the sort of whistleblower avenues, making sure those are robust.
I was going to say that, but I just wasn't sure.
Get through the whole panel without that word.
No, but these are opportunities for people who might have concerns, who would otherwise disclose that information in a way that would do damage, to bring those to light through established processes, making sure that they actually work. That is a concern, and we've gotten better over the years. I say we as a U.S. government, as a country, in developing those. Companies follow suit and do the same thing, again, around hotlines, anonymous ways to bring complaints forward. I think that releases some of the pressure on individuals who have concerns, who might otherwise leak or disclose information in an unauthorized way, to bring them forward in a way that can be constructive. Work to do there, but I think that's kind of the path forward.
What you said.
I think it's fantastic, and also gets back to that core trust issue as well. We are just about out of time, but the good news is, because it's kind of end of day, y'all are going to be around for a little bit longer for the reception, so we encourage you to come up and chat about this issue more, especially when it comes to, and I know that both of you feel this is very strongly, bridging that gap of understanding what national security means between one coast and another. To protect the whole nation. So it's a fascinating topic. And Tyler, can we have just like an extra hour? Do you mind?
We're in time.
So a big thank you, of course, to Dennis, to Tyler, to CNBC for putting this on, and to Sue and Matt for joining me here today.
Great, thank you all.
Thank you very much.